Hello, dear friends. This podcast episode I've not wanted to make for a while because it's very sensitive issues that they're not particular to the two by twos. But they are a cult issue. And however, there are some people who have created let's say, online two by two support groups or so-called support groups. And these people, um, through their behavior and actions and the way they've administrated these groups, have brought this issue to light. Okay, so I just think it's important to discuss it because it's a real issue that's very serious and it impacts in very negative ways. Okay, so what are we talking about? I'm going to give you the background. There is some people who were two by twos all their lives, and then they left the two by twos very recently, and these are married couples, and they decided to create a Facebook group called Two by X Two by Two Support, and these people, um, it's not as if these people had been recovered from their two by two experience. I mean, they were not at all. But it's not as if there weren't already existing Facebook groups for X two by twos or other forums. There was many, but these people decided that they needed to have one of their own, and it had basically the same amount of members as any of the other groups until there was they got insider information about a letter about an overseer who had been diddling kids, and they posted, and that created a huge swarm of people, new entrants joining their groups, and then their group can now become the dominant Facebook groups for X2 by 2s. I mean, I don't know if it's 4 or 5,000 people or something. I don't know, but this process made these people, or these administrators of this group, quite famous in the X2 by 2 community. And these people then started interacting with outside media people. And once you interact with one media person, it becomes easier to interact with others and so forth. And so far, and recently, these people did a 5-hour podcast with a pretty big podcast about cults. And they told their life stories basically on these podcasts. So you can find, so the things I'm about to say today about these people in terms of whatever is all things that have been mentioned by themselves on these podcasts. I'm not disclosing any insider information. They've already put it in the public domain. So what is the issue? Well, the issue is that both female, these two couples, the female from each of the couple, so there's two women right on each couple, man and woman, man and woman. Both the females have said publicly that they are bisexuals. Now, they're married to men. They have children with men. In fact, one of them has 3 kids. The other has 2, I think. They both have said they've never had any sexual relations with other females, but that they are bisexual. Okay, and when did they discover their bisexuality? When they left the 2 by 2s. Okay, so, and when was that? Well, that was like in the last couple of years. Okay, so, and how old are these people? Well, they're in their millennials, so like late 30s, early 40s. So the issue is like, how is that possible? How are people thinking they're bisexual when they're in midlife, especially when they're going through all kinds of crises about themselves coming out of a cult? I mean, again, if you listen to the podcast, these people not only have been seeing therapists, of course, but they have been suicidal. They've, been totally upside down, like incapacitated to do anything. Both females don't have any education, okay, other than grade 12 in the United States. They, I mean, whatever, like they, of course, like, many people, they go down rabbit holes on the internet and YouTube videos and that kind of stuff, right? So they've, of course, fallen into like the new atheist rabbit holes on YouTube, Hitchens and stuff like that. So They think they've got a good handle on things. Of course, this is a peasant level understanding of things. And of course, like they're in the very early stages of recovery from a cult, right? I mean, the idea that somehow they would have things figured out after a year or two is not possible, especially given the age of them and the other things going on in their life. So they have created, like I said, this Facebook group where they are the administrators of a so-called support group. Now, of course, it's totally inappropriate for persons who themselves are not in any way recovered from their cult experience to be administrating a support group. They have no idea what the boundaries should be, who should be let in, who should not be, how to moderate this. They have no idea, right? It's really just fly by the seat of the pants. You're having blind leading the blind. It's very dangerous. And in fact, they've effectively created. They tried to actually turn both the women from these two things. Both the women have turned this into basically their life, right? But they have nothing else to do. They don't have jobs. They're not educated. But they've taken on this role as like the crusader anti two by two, right? And they're advocating for justice. Well, what kind of justice? Well, they're for the people who have been sexually assaulted by the two by two, whatever ministers or whatever. Okay, I mean it's valiant that they're going to be crusading, but what are they actually going to do? There's very little can be done. Only the FBI or law enforcement can actually do anything. So, but they can make a lot of noise and make themselves feel important. Okay, so I want to get to why did these two women claim to be bisexual, even though they have had no experiences or anything like that that would, that's actual, backed up their claims. The issue is you have to go back to their childhood. You have to go back to a two by two childhood. What's it like? This is not going to be the same for every two by two kid, obviously, but generally speaking, as a two by two child, you are isolated from other non two by two children. And you're isolated from participating in activities with those people. And you're isolated because you can't communicate with them very well at all because you don't have a television, you don't share any of the talking points that these other kids have. So what's the trouble here? Well, as you're, preteens and early teens, the most important thing for a child of that age is acceptance by their peers, to be included in the peer group. Well, these two by two kids are definitely not going to be accepted by their peers, right? Or even if they are, they themselves are not going to authentically feel accepted because they always have this hidden secret, which is they know they're faking it because they don't, right? So but they want to be accepted. Okay, so the strongest point in their lives is to be accepted by their peers, and so they identify anyone who is their peers who maybe like shows them some acceptance. They start to really attach to that person. Okay, they want to be that person. They want to basically take over that person's identity. I don't mean like steal their social security number. I mean become that. They are mimicking that person because they know that person's accepted. So they want to be accepted. So they take on all the mannerisms and basically get as close to that person as possible. Now, for these young two by two females, that becomes an incredibly strong bonding moment. Most two by two females as children do not bond with their mothers, which is a normal bonding with mothers is one of the most important things that happens for females. But for these girls, it generally doesn't because they're in like these fairly dysfunctional homes, especially where there's abuse going on, where the father's abusing the children and the mother, maybe verbally. I mean, also they see in the home that like obviously women are second-class citizens, so they don't actually want to model themselves after the mother. You wouldn't model yourself off after a slave, right? So they do model themselves off of these other non two by two girls, and they try to take on their identity. And that results in a bonding moment for young females, which becomes highly attached And of course, another word for this, a colloquial word, is a crush. Okay. So they think it's a crush. Now, of course, inevitably they're going to grow out of this, right? This is what's happened with both these women I'm talking about from this X2x2 support group. They obviously had these crushes. They then moved on. They got married, 2x2 men. They had sexual intercourse with these men. They produced babies. They had active sex lives with these men. Yet somehow now in their, midlife, when they're going through all these mental crises about leaving a cult, they decide to hit on that they are lesbians. And why? Because they remember that the first person they were ever attracted to was a female. Yeah, it was a child when they were a preteen or early teen, because they went through this bonding experience. That's what happened. That is not a bisexuality. That's a common problem amongst poorly socialized children. And the issue is, like, if you're actually a bisexual person, you will have acted on it. Because you can't really say you're bisexual if you haven't experienced sexual relations with both sexes. It's impossible to say that. You can't say, "Well, I'm attracted." I'm attracted. People can say I'm attracted to dogs, but until you have sex relations with a dog, you don't know if that's actually something you're really interested in. And the reason I point this out is, like, just to put this in a more crude form. Let's say there's a male who says that he is bisexual. Okay, so he's been having sex with females. Then he says, "Oh yeah, but I'm attracted to males also." Okay, well then he goes and is sodomized. Okay, and then does he go back a second time for more sodomization? Probably not, right? That's a pretty rude awakening, that using your anus as a vagina is not very pleasurable. In fact, it's very painful. In many cases, these men end up in the hospital with torn anuses. So that is, he can say all he wants he's bisexual until he actually engages in it. These claims are totally nonsense. And all they are is some kind of signaling. Now, why do I use the word signaling? Because in our contemporary era, it's very in vogue to claim that you are a sexual deviant, say that you are a bisexual or homosexual. I mean, these types of identities are celebrated in our current society. For whatever reasons, it doesn't matter. The fact is they are. And so think of these 2x2 women who've become X2x2s, right? They've given up their entire 2x2 identity. No, they've left. They have no identity. Okay. Because when you're in 2x2s, the only identity you have is being a 2x2. You have, so they're in an identity crisis. So they'll latch on to anything that's around them. Instead of latching on to, like, no, I'm going to, take on identity as a person of Western civilization. I'm going to read deeply into the Western canon. No, these people went on the internet, watched some YouTube videos, heard about, like, this, that, and everything. Yes, they are, of course, bisexual. That's their identity they took on. You may not know this, but there's no studies in the last 15 years that show there's a growth of LGBT people in the United States. Okay. Now, but if you dig deeper into those numbers, you find out, like, for example, homosexual males in the last, like, 15 years, the number of percentages still remains the same, basically 2 to 2.5%. All of the growth in LGBT has been in terms of young women who say they're bisexual. Okay. Why? Because they're not bisexual. They're just pretending it's a cool thing. It's in vogue. It's a social contagion problem. And these two X2x2 women have fallen into that trap as well. Okay. Unfortunately, what's the issue? They think that's just like a problem for them. No, it's not. No, it's not. Because these women, as administrators of a X2x2 support group, are supposedly guiding other X2x2s along, because they're the moderators, right? So they themselves are, and they publicly says they're very pro LGBTQ. And they don't want to, so anything that they might perceive as being offside about that topic, they, cancel or whatever, ban this person. So the issue is they themselves don't have a very good understanding of the topic, as I've just pointed out, because they're confused, and thus they are promoting it. So imagine this. Imagine you're a young, just newly X2 by2 male. You go into this group and they're actively promoting you to explore your bisexuality. Okay. You're like, well, maybe I am, because one of the first people I was attracted to was a male when I was a preteen. Well, yeah, because you were trying to take on his identity. So yeah, you might be bisexual. Oh yeah, so I'll go and try it out. So you go and you go into local bushes where there's like a cruising zone for gay males, and you go start sucking some penises or being sodomized. And it turns out you don't like that after you experience it. Now what? No big deal? No, it is a huge deal, because now you've traumatized yourself. There's a huge trauma event, and you're going to have that for the rest of your life. And why did that happen? All because you went in a group where there are other people promoting that you engage in this. They're the issue. They're gaslighting you. Okay, they're gaslighting you into traumatizing yourself. That's insane. That's a crazy situation, and that's why this type of situation with these women who are totally confused and not recovered from their cult experience, don't understand anything about what's even going on with them currently about their identity, should not be administrating a group like this. There's another group that was started as a similar situation. It was for basically like teenage or late early 20s people, X2 by2s, and it was on a Discord server. In the same thing, it was a young man who was the administrator, and he was, I don't know, 20 years old or something. And he too, just newly X2 by2. In fact, he was still going to the meetings, but he was pretending, that he was a two, even he was in his head, he was X2 by2. And this Discord group got full of other young people, and they were again promoting bisexuality and then furries and obviously homosexuality amongst. So imagine this: other young preteens and teens who are X2 by2s or just curious X2 by2s getting in there, and there was like a couple hundred people in there, I think, and being exposed to this promotion of either bisexuality or homosexuality or in other sexual deviance. That's totally unhealthy. These people are in a massive crisis point in their life because they're leaving a cult. You don't expose them to this sort of stuff. It's not an exploring of your sexual identity. It's exploring of how to traumatize yourself. You don't go doing that. But this is what's going on. And if a person went in there and tried to say, hey, like, just cool it. Maybe you should only be talking about the cult aspect of things. It's not about your damn sexuality that you perceive because you're confused about things. No, you're kicked out. Okay, so that's what's been going on. Now, I think that's a horrible situation. I mean, really, if you wanted to harm these poor people, these suffering people, these people, this is how you do it: is you create what these people have done. Now, the incidence of homosexuality amongst 2 by 2s is pretty high, right? And as I stated, it has a lot to do with this poor socialization of the 2 by 2 children, where they're isolated, and so they end up trying to take on the identity of some non 2 by 2s or child that they know who's allowing them to get close to them, and then they become attached. This is their only window to sanity, basically. This one other child. They become highly attached. They and even if it's only a minor attachment, they become fantasizing about this other person. Okay. And when they go through puberty, that fantasization can become sexualized, sexual fantasization, which is ask basically any homosexual male to tell you this is what happened to them during the puberty era. Okay. And it's because of a poor socialization aspect. Now, as I said, like the 2 by 2 system, the way the children are raised, they're setting these kids up for this to happen to them, which is why there's high rates of sexual deviance in 2 by 2s and especially X2 by 2s when in later life. Like, instead of trying to say, hey, we'll try and help you, show you how that you went on this path and try to walk it back and see you can see where the road forked in your life and caused these issues for you so you don't hurt yourself anymore. No, no, no. Let's promote that you do more of this stuff. And so you hurt and damage and traumatize yourself even more. That's what they're suggesting. This is a major problem in the X2x2 community. Major. It's and there's really no way to insert proper thinking about this because the people who are controlling the gates are highly ideological and themselves are highly messed up. Anyways, I'm hoping that this little episode, podcast episode, will provide some clarity. Maybe some people will be helped. If not, can't unlisten to it.